Welcome to the Raw Rugby League podcast. I'm Meehall Wood, and today we're doing a literal deep dive. We're heading into the water off the coast of Queensland to take a look at the Dolphins and their first 18 months or so in the NRL. To do that, we've got what I'm calling the head and the heart. The first is one of the best journals around, a man who knows as much as there is to know about the Queensland Rugby League scene. We've got Joel Gould from AAP. Hey, Joel.
Great to be here, Mike. Fantastic.
And the second is the NRL's go-to guy for all things medical, Brien Seeney, better known as NRL Physio, but for our purposes, one of the biggest Dolphin fans on the internet and possibly in the world.
Brien, there's not many of us, mate. So we're growing, but especially on the internet. But yeah, no, it's good to be here.
I think that's a good place to start. Is obviously like you've got a vintage Redcliffe jersey on the wall behind you. So what's your sort of journey with the Dolphins and where they, from sort of growing up to entering the NRL and where they are now? I guess that's the emotional journey to start us off on, because I think people don't know quite how many Dolphin fans there were prior to them being in the NRL.
Yeah, so I've got a bit of a romanticised version of the Dolphins because I was born in Redcliffe and I lived in Redcliffe till I was about 13 or 14. So a lot of my formative years where I didn't really know, so I can't sit here and tell you about the ins and outs and, how the Dolphins ran back in the day. As you said, I can probably talk to you a lot about the heart and kind of what the Dolphins were to Redcliffe, or certainly my community of Redcliffe, the community I was involved in, because the best way I've described it to people is I moved away from Redcliffe and that became hard to kind of keep up with what was going on with the Dolphins then. But when you were in Redcliffe, the NRL was secondary to the Dolphins. That was always I was never a Broncos fan when I was a kid. I was a Dolphins fan. And when you had your guys go from the Dolphins up to the Broncos, I would almost be disappointed because you wouldn't get to see them at Dolphin Oval on the weekend. It wasn't like, oh, great. I think probably the most excited I got was when the likes of Adam Mogg got into the Queensland side, and that was a big deal because we all still followed Origin. But yeah, I think the Dolphins were just so much part of the sporting landscape in Redcliffe when I was growing up. It was what so many people did on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, go down to Dolphin Oval, and if first grade was playing there at home for that weekend, then you'd obviously watch that. But even if they weren't, there'd always be footy on and around. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Is I certainly growing up, I knew the Dolphins players probably better than I did NRL players.
Do you know, when you put it like that, because I grew up in Rochdale, right? Well, we play third grade now. We played second grade when I was a kid, and that's exactly the same thing where there was the Super League. You might go and watch Bradford Bulls, who were the closest kind of team we used to go and watch. I'm a whole FC supporter, they're miles away. So you go and watch Rochdale Hornets every single week and develop a love of Jason Demetriou and hatred for Anthony Seibold, as they used to play against us and for us at different points. But so, Joel, obviously having been around this scene for years and years and years, where did the Dolphins sit within Queensland prior to them being, in England, we're used to teams going up and down all the time, right? We're used to Lee being second grade, first grade. Every whole team's been up and down. But that's obviously a different situation in Australia. It seemed to me like the Dolphins had an outsized form, even within Queensland Rugby League, prior to them coming into the NRL.
Oh, definitely they did. And I think the thing about the Dolphins, the Redcliffe Dolphins, for so many years, especially in the Queensland Cup, was that they were the powerhouse side. They won comps. They won more comps than anyone else. I've got 6, I believe, that they won in the Queensland Cup. And especially in the early 2000s through to 2006, they were extremely dominant. So they were the high flyers of the competition, and also known for winning, but also known as a rugby league club, a football club. A lot of clubs, and I think that's carried over into the current iteration. Some clubs want to get involved in a whole lot of things outside of footy. Redcliffe is about winning rugby league games and about providing pathways for footballers. So they've been very much like that, and they've had so many great players, coaches like Arthur Beetson, Mark Murray, Brian Niebling, Petro Sivanasiva. The list goes on. For some of the greatest players to lace a boot have played for Redcliffe. So I guess when you ask where do they sit in the rugby league landscape, that they were right at the top of any and even through the BRL, they won 3 BRL comps. I'm pretty sure.
Might be 4 because they won one when the Queensland Cup started, when they had the BRL and the Queensland Cup.
But they were right up there as a powerhouse before the Broncos came in. So they've always stood in that echelon, right at the top.
So looking from the outside, right, it seems to me like when they, the great metaphor of sort of fish where the fish are, or fish where the dolphins are, if you will, was because they were such an outsized team. And it wasn't so much, in my head, I thought of it as like when Toulouse came into the Super League, we didn't expand to Toulouse. We already existed in Toulouse. This was something that we already had. And they already brought their own structures, their own juniors, everything, their own stadium. You didn't need to go out of your way to make that exist. And it seems to me like the Dolphins it's expansion without expansion, and which makes the confusing to me. Why I'm getting a head shake. So I understand sort of the meta reason for it, but is that to do with kind of a problem that Redcliffe isn't Brisbane and Brisbane isn't Redcliffe? Because this seems to be something that comes in that I've never had a satisfactory answer to. I'm looking at Brien for this.
I think Brien might have the answer to that one.
This is easily the most frustrating part of the team coming into the comp for me, and like especially for fans, right? Especially for those fans who are already fans of the Dolphins. But it seemed like the rugby league community as a whole, and I think and we'll talk about like the general overall success of the club, and I think we're doing really well and all that kind of thing. So I guess that's kind of almost made it that they've kind of said, oh, we made, what a great decision. We've done this and they're doing really well, and that's fantastic. But for me, part of what makes footy and sport is the tribalism, the identity of a team. And I just found it really, really unsatisfactory, or just the high of getting into the comp was huge, and we were all just so excited. And then obviously we found out they were going to be called the Dolphins. And I obviously would have loved them to be called Redcliffe, but for me, I would have been happy if it was, the Moreton Bay or the North Coast, or like whatever you wanted to call them, just calling them the Dolphins and saying we don't have, we are extending from, we're having the Battle of Brisbane, but we're also Rockhampton, and we're also like that. For me, still does my head in. And I think while we're kind of living in this romanticized version of the team and they're new and all that kind of stuff, I think as the team gets ironed on into the comp, that'll kind of count against them in a way, I believe, because I think they need like an identity and a tribe.
Do you think there's probably something in that if you go back to the tribalism of the BRL days? I think of this from the very New South Wales Rugby League kind of lens, but like all the Bears fans who haven't picked anybody else, they're still Bears fans. It's kind of like using that logic where it perhaps didn't apply. Like, I don't think people who support East Tigers or Wynnum Manly are suddenly going to go, I'm going to pick Redcliffe over the Broncos, over the Titans or whoever. And I wonder, is that tribalism something that they were trying to avoid, or is it trying to be all things to all men? I guess Joel might be able to remember that from back in the day a bit better.
Yeah, it's funny. Like going to Dolphins games, I've met some supporters that have just turned up from other states, and they just got on the bandwagon of they weren't really rugby league people, and they've gone on the bandwagon of the Dolphins because it's a local team. There's a lot of people living up there. I think the Dolphins have attracted a lot of that sort of support from people that like the event. Well, you go to a Broncos game, a lot of people go for the event, and it's become something that you do. And I think with the Dolphins, I believe when I see the crowd at the Dolphins and I see the Dagwood Dogs stands and all that sort of stuff, and the way they run it there, it has that real country rugby league feel about it. And there's a lot of leathery, wiry old cobbers there that I fancy I saw back in the Queensland Cup days when I used to go there and cover Anthony Griffin's team when I was working covering rugby league for the Redcliffe Herald. So I feel like all those people have sort of turned up as Dolphins supporters, but I feel like they've also captured the imagination of a lot of other people. And the fins up thing seems to have really worked for them as well. It's hard for me to look. I can't really quantify it. I can't basically prove what I'm saying, but I think from anecdotally what I've seen, I think they've somehow managed, even though they don't have that name associated with a region, that they've still managed to capture some people just with the pizzazz, and I think the Bennett factor is certainly part of it as well, and the fins up and the way they've been marketed. I think it's worked, and I'm not sure who those people are, but they seem to have arrived and embraced it for whatever reason.
This is a bit of a companion episode to our previous one on the Warriors, which is a lot of what was said by our guests in the Warriors chat was very similar. Like the event, the sort of person it attracts isn't perhaps the same as other clubs, and that's kind of why the up the wires, fins up comparison might be there. But you've moved us on to the actual sort of birth of the club there with Bennett, and I guess when you're going to get a coach now, that you can't start an NRL club without Bennett being the coach. That appears to be one of the rules that's put into the expansion now, as if there was only one coach and it had to be sort of a wise old owl kind of character. But how important was it when he was named in terms of, as a figurehead, he's really, really good, obviously. Like, he's made a whole career out of it. But when you look at, for example, Brien, you're going, who can we get? Oh, my Lord, we've got Wayne Bennett. This isn't going to be rinky-dink. It's going to be, I don't know. I love the fair dinkum / Mickey Mouse comparison, but this is going to be fair dinkum, I think, as the Australians call it, as soon as the name like his is attached.
Yeah, I think that just, as I said, like the coming into the comp was exciting enough, but to hear that Wayne was going to be, behind it, you just knew that. And I mean, they missed out on so many signings early on, but I think that like the signings that they did make would not have materialized as well without Bennett there. We all know that players like to go and play for him. And so some of those younger guys like your Isaiah Katoas and those kind of guys, I just don't know if you would have got them over the line without Wayne there. So it just kind of gave you that, I guess, that surety that, as you said, we weren't going to come in and not handle it and just be like, wooden spooners for 5 or 6 years. While, once we constructed our roster, we weren't thinking, that finals were going to be anytime soon or anything like that. It just, having Wayne there just gives you, a sense of safety and being like, yep, okay, this is, as you said, this is going to go well. And
Joel, you've been on the Bennett beat for years. And I have to say, because as we'll get onto this, the Dolphins are yet to play a game in Sydney that I've actually been able to go to. I don't think I've had to deal with him once since certainly not since he was Kangaroos coach and England coach, But having been on the Bennett beat for years, what did you think was in it for Wayne at the time, other than the obvious getting paid and staying in the NRL? But there must be something else that drives him to do that. And because it's a big risk for him with such a big legacy behind him to go into a club that could be anything.
It takes me back to when all the drama was at the Broncos in 2018, and there was some question over whether he would, if he didn't coach the Broncos, where would he go? And I said to him, Wayne, do you think you'll keep coaching? And he said, he goes, well, what would I do? I'm not a social person. And the way he said it, it just stood out to me. It's exactly the case. What else would he do? Wayne is a coach, and I get the feeling, although I did speak to the Broncos founding director, Barry Miranda, recently, and he's not so sure. Like, everyone's got their opinion on what Wayne might do next, but he's not so sure that Wayne will go to Sydney. He feels like that it's almost come a time where there's other things and family concerns in his life, but I'm not so sure about that. I think Bennett was never going to do anything else except this. And it's funny, when the big teams were presenting to Peter V'landys and the commission, and I was talking to them about who their coach would be, they all had Bennett lined up. So the Firehawks would have gone for Bennett. The Brisbane Jets would have had Bennett. The Dolphins had Bennett. So he couldn't lose, right? So he was in the background there waiting for the curtain to be pulled back and unveiled, whichever team was unveiled, Wayne was going to coach it.
It's interesting. So, it's like he was trying to work out which colour he looked best in. Does he look best in red or in Ipswich Jets is green, right? So
it's a good question, you know. Like, funnily enough, he did actually coach out at Ipswich in his formative years back in the 70s. He did coach out there, and David Middleton tells me it wasn't. I think Google might have it as Brothers Ipswich. That wasn't correct. It was like some sort of a representative style of the team in a particular competition. When he had his 900th, I did write about that Ipswich because David had found what that team was. But I think the Ipswich team would have suited Wayne's lifestyle better because he has a farm out at Warwick, and it would have been a lot closer to that. He's not going to say that, of course, now, but he would have coached whoever came in. And you know, when you talk to Peter Volandis and you listen to him, it's almost like Bennett's coaching the next expansion team.
Yeah,
it's almost like you said in a condition. But I mean, Parramatta or South Sydney or somewhere else might have another say in that. But he was destined to coach this team, no question.
And the other sort of thing, which, you know, he's often had the successor. You know, we can see now Jason Demetriou sort of taking over from him straight away. But the idea that you get a successor and name him before you've even played a game it's got to be unprecedented. And even though, you know, obviously I've had a bit over the years watched a lot of Christian Wolf style football from Tonga and from St Helens, but like it's a very unusual situation. And I wonder, when you're approaching that as a supporter, it's very strange to watch a team, Brien, and go, we've got this guy, and then we've also got this other guy who is also the coach. But everyone knows, you know, anyone who watched South Sydney play knew that Jason Demetriou was coaching, you know, the on-field tactics whilst Bennett was doing the other stuff. It's a very strange situation, which I guess you see it maybe a little bit in soccer where there's people can tell, you know, or in American football, you have the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. It's not a thing in rugby league. And so as a supporter, when you're watching it and they play well, who do you credit? And when they play badly, who do you blame?
No, like, honestly, the signing of Wolf for me, as much as I got really excited about Bennett, being a footy head, I guess, like, obviously, I think the signing of Wayne Bennett obviously excited footy heads, but it also just excited the general public and people who were, you know, on the fringes of footy. Whereas, yeah, for me, being somebody who likes to follow football here, abroad, internationally, all of those, I was really excited about Wolf being signed up. So that kind of, because I love Wayne and he's, you know, the greatest coach of all time, but certainly Wayne has his guys, you know, that he sticks to and sometimes probably turns a blind eye to a few things, whether it be on field or off field. And it just made me feel even better once again that I knew that Wolf would be there with his history coming from St Helens with so much success, that there would be that guy behind it all, and also to pass it on to, obviously, now that we wouldn't be left, because the criticism is always there that Wayne leaves clubs in, you know, tatters and bloody blah, which I don't really believe. But I just think having Wolf there as like, yep, he's there for the formative years and then he's going to take over, it definitely, gave me some, surety once again that the club wouldn't just be a flash in the pan.
There's probably something in the whole way that the Dolphins have come into the competition, as well as being with this long-term plan. They haven't arrived like, you know, we're only going to be here for 2 years. I think of the way that Terry Reader speaks about the league's club backing, and the way that they can tell you, you know, they signed all these sort of players with the knowledge that most of them wouldn't be there when Wolf even took over. It seems like a very sensible setup process, which is quite unlike most examples of rugby league expansion over the years. Was that the feeling that you got from the sort of first iterations of it, Joel? That these people were like serious heads who were gonna, you know, who weren't thinking of this as a 2-3 year thing, but as a 20-30 year thing?
It's exactly the way it is. Like the Dolphins, I guess when Arthur Beetson wrote about in his autobiography that he'd love to see the Roosters play the Dolphins in first grade, it sort of planted a seed, I guess. And then Arthur actually asked me to ask John Singleton if this is about 3 years before he passed, if he would fund a Redcliffe team, because they have a great history together. And Singleton has a connection to Redcliffe through a bloke called Forrester Grayson, who used to ride in rodeos. And because of a bet that Singo lost, he ended up having to fund the rodeos himself. But that's another story. But Singo, I
might be the most Queensland thing I've ever heard, by the way.
What's that?
That might be the most Queensland thing I've ever heard.
But yeah, well, that's right. He woke up with the contract in his pocket in the Redcliffe Leagues Club. Singo, he told me the story. It's quite a funny one. But Singo said to me, he said, "Look, I'm not going to fund it. I've had enough of the NRL." But he said, "You can tell after this it'll work." And when the club came in, I revisited it with Singo and spoke to him about that again. We did another story. But so when there was a talk of expansion about 2010, 11, it looked like it was either going to be Perth or the Central Queensland or the Ipswich bid. I rang Bobby Jones, and coming back to your point, are these serious heads? Bobby Jones was the chairman at the time of the Redcliffe Dolphins. And he said, look, he said, we are going to wait until they call for tenders. We're going to keep our powder dry. They didn't get involved in a whole lot of media because the NRL hadn't shown that they were 100% serious about it. And so they kept their powder dry. They got themselves ready for when expansion finally got to the pointy end. So the Dolphins, even though they weren't in the media talk for a long period of time when it was all about Ipswich, all about the Bombers, all about CQ, Perth, all this sort of thing, they were ready and waiting to pounce when Volandis decided that they were going to expand. So I think, yes, they really were serious about it. And then when it came to Wolf, I spoke to Terry Reader about this the other day, and he said, well, the reason we got Christian was because we gave him a definite plan, and Wayne had his fingerprints all over that and also accepted it. So it wasn't like Bennett was saying, look, I'd like to be here for 5 years, and the Dolphins come back and say no, and Wolf gets fed up and doesn't end up coming. They had that set in stone very, very early that Bennett was going to coach for the first year when there was no team, obviously, and then in recruitment, and then for 2, and then over to Christian for 3. So that was set. So yeah, very serious about it, and very methodical. Christian didn't just take the job either. He'd spent quite a bit of time investigating what the Dolphins had underneath, what their plans were, what the pathways were, what they should be. And so it was a great meeting of the minds, I suppose, between the Redcliffe, the Dolphins hierarchy, Bennett and Wolf, to create this succession plan that we've seen at other clubs. Where Wayne was part of the Demetrio one at South Sydney. He actually pitched a Demetrio takeover to the Broncos when he left there when he was sacked from the Broncos. But before that, he pitched a Demetrio takeover. So Wayne's done this quite a bit, where he seems to understand that he's not going to be around forever, and that there needs to be a plan I think he was keen to set this up and then have someone very qualified, very reliable that he believed in to take over. And don't forget, he also wanted Sam Burgess there. So that was his other plan, was to have Sam working alongside of him and alongside Christian Wolf. That never eventuated, of course.
He's the more that you learn about people like this, I think it's about Ricky Stewart a lot, is that it's the best coaches know what they don't know. And so he knows exactly who to get to sit next to him to fill in the gaps. I think in terms of that as well, like having someone like him who's the figurehead, and he has that attractive power, but also like he knew he was getting rounds 1 and 2, seasons round 1 and 2 of the process, in which ultimately, like guys like you, Brien, who've supported Redcliffe your whole life, if they'd have lost every game, you weren't going to stop supporting them, I guess. Like, so when you got, I know a lot of people sort of use the Expendables metaphor for the Bromwiches and Matt Nichols and Carfusi, and sort of very much getting the band back together from, that's the players who would build that culture and make that team even before they'd stepped on a field. What were your views on that, sort of going into the first game against the Roosters, almost 18 months ago now, where, I don't know how many points the Roosters started as favourites in, but plenty. And you've got guys who we now see as being the first legends of the team, Hammersmith, Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow being top of the list, for example, or Jermaine Asako, who most people would have said these guys couldn't get a game elsewhere. Did you expect to lose 40-0, or do you think, does it matter? I'm just happy to be here.
I like, you've brought me on as the heart of this podcast. Like, I was just, and it's one of the sayings I hate the most in sport is like, just happy to be here. Like, if your team's in the grand final or something, just happy to be here. But I genuinely have never felt more just happy to be here on that first day at Suncorp Stadium. It would, like, if we had lost 50-0, yeah, it would have sucked. Don't get me wrong, but I just could not. I still get excited even now, like, in the battle to lead up to Battle to Brisbane, and the Broncos are saying, like Kevy's saying, calling us Redcliffe, calling them the Redcliffe Dolphins. And that just, like, they were saying it to, like, kind of piss off the Dolphins club. But to me as a supporter who, like, loves, like, I was just like, this is fantastic. Keep calling them Redcliffe Dolphins. Like, I still get that feeling of, like, this is so good that they're, to think that club that I grew up watching, on the hill at Dolphin Oval is now in the National Rugby League, which is the competition that I've grown to love, in my teenage and adult years, and just how, it's the top league. So the fact that they're there. So yeah, I think initially my expectations were not high. I think I was on a podcast in that preseason. I tipped them for the spoon because I just didn't see the strength on paper in their squad. Like, I think a lot of people didn't, but yeah, once again, like, I think that, and it obviously wore off in that second half of the year when they sort of faced a few different injuries and, like, obviously that pizzazz wearing off. But yeah, it's, you can't, I don't think you can counter vibes is what I would say. And the vibes were through the roof early on.
I'm trying to think of there's a 2006 vibe around the place, but it's probably about 1976 if you're the Redcliffe Dolphins. But I guess there's a flow-on question from that as well, so as a neutral observer, I have to say there is 50% of me that loves the Dolphins because they are just this permanent underdog story, and then 50% of me thinks they're the worst football team to watch in the entire league, which if I supported them, and I say this as a Hull FC supporter who won, several Challenge Cups, being a dreadful team to watch, but if you win, who cares? But, like, there is an element of what Wayne does and what he's got in a roster is real simple, and yet he does it so well. Like, I think off the top of my head, they've got the highest completion rate in the comp, like, and that is all they try and do, and assume that every other team will beat themselves. And basically, it works. Like, it works. Is that something that you look at and go, let's not put the cart before the horse here. Let's just try and play the way that's going to get the most out of this, the guys that we have. And then in 2 years under Christian Wolf, we might be scintillating rugby league.
Yeah, I think with the guys that we've signed a bit longer term, like your Isaiah Katoas, we've got Hammer there for a while. Like, you've got that core that they might not have been the superstars when they first signed on. But I think you brought up a really good point about all the old Melbourne boys coming in and sort of building that culture. Like, while the team and the club were already so established, I think it was really important to get some older guys there who are going to set that culture, because I think it's been a thing in Brisbane with the Broncos in recent years where there was a lot of criticism around the culture and not having those senior guys there to kind of set that. And Joel could probably talk to that even more. But yeah, I find that, like, I think it's definitely looking up, especially once Wolf, fully takes over, in that, like, from what I saw when he was at St. Helens, there was some pretty exciting footy there, and we've got the pieces in place that I think, and a fair bit of money in the salary cap now, that hopefully they can, like, just expand on it in the coming years.
And you're starting to get, I guess, the two paths that went alongside that was that you then start to get guys like, I know, Jack Bostock, Trey Fuller, Valence Tefare, where it is the sort of the Q Cup All-Stars. That must be the most sort of, you've got to have the guys you think, right, we do need these guys to be competent, but we've got to have these guys who, prove that we are the same club that goes all the way through. Because I use this as the same example again, but, like, it's all well and good, the Catalans, for example, where having Mitchell Pearce or Sam Tompkins or whoever, but if they don't also have the French guys who go through, like, what's the actual point? Like, what are we doing here? We could be anywhere. And I feel like Redcliffe has been really good in giving those dudes who are only Redcliffe. I mean, Josh Kerr's not going to be one of anyone's favourite signings, but getting a guy who's a Redcliffe junior to play for Redcliffe means something to guys like you, I'd imagine.
Oh, huge. And I was like the signing I was most devastated that we didn't go after really hard was Corey Horsburgh, because he loves it. His old man is like, you know, one of the biggest Dolphins fans going around, and he, you know, just grew up living and breathing the Dolphins. So to get those guys back, and I grew up loving the Q Cup. So it's not just the Dolphins for me. It's like seeing those guys. Like I grew up watching Aaron Barber score 33 tries in a season and just absolutely scoring 3 tries in the grand final. I was sitting there watching that happen, and and thinking back now, I'm like, man, like how did he score 33 tries in a season and not get a shot in the NRL? Like, how did that not happen? And so now you've got guys like Trey Fuller, who, you know, he tears it up in the Q Cup week in, week out. And to see him go out there, you know, and do his thing is just, yeah, it makes me feel like, once again, the heart is full. And I think the head will start to take over at some point, but it's all heart at the moment still. And it's fantastic.
Joel, when you're, you know, going back to that, it's 5-4 on the Sunday in the first game, and you think, is this going to be the dream that Brien wants it to be, or is this going to be a complete massacre? Like, how have you experienced that journey from covering them and having to sort of deal with them on a week-to-week basis, from being a team that everyone thought was going to get flogged to, you know, actually turned out to be a pretty good footy team, and certainly results-wise anyway?
Exactly. Look, I remember before the season started last year, there were quite a few headlines about, and there was a few guys quoted saying, "Won't win a game. Won't win a game," they said. And look, before that game against the Roosters, this was meant to be a rejuvenated Roosters. And a lot of the talk before that match too had been how the Dolphins had come up empty, trying to sign Ponga, trying to sign Munster, Tino Fa'asuamaleaui, all these guys they'd missed out on. And people took a look at the roster that took the field, and they were written off. That win, I remember last year at the presentation night, Wayne Bennett spoke, and he said that win and those early wins were vital for the Dolphins to get off to the start that they needed to get off to get the support of the community. If they'd been duds, he said it would have been a disaster. And I can't remember exact words. I was going back to go on leave, and I didn't get around to writing the story because I recorded what he said from the stage. I might have referred to it in a piece, but he did quite wax lyrical about how important that was to win. And it just took me back to what Ben and Shane Walker, and I've done pieces with them about what they got out of Bennett. What's Wayne's modus operandi? What's the secret to his success as a coach? And I remember Ben said to me, there's 3 things, and that is work hard as a training, that is, compete hard, and show your skill. And I think that's what Bennett's got his team to do. And look, they don't have Munster. They don't have Ponga. They don't have Tedesco. They don't have these guys they don't have a lot of guys anyway that ooze skill. So he's had to rely on the first 2 tenets of, say that is his philosophy, which is basically right. I think he's had to rely on work hard, compete hard, because they're not blessed with a lot of those magicians. And that's probably funneled into how they play football. I think guys that, you know, I think Farmworth and these sort of guys, and certainly blokes like Fuller, who's full of skill, who knows what his future would be. I mean, he's an older guy that's come through playing Preston Campbell-style football, right, from Central Queensland. But, I mean, the more guys that they can get that show that skill, I think you're going to see a different football team. Because when Wayne had the Origin greats in the first 5 years at Brisbane, they still didn't win the comps in those years, even though they had the masters of skill. It took them to 92. So I think the team's done extremely well so far, and I think if they can add more of that, just a bit more strike, and this is where Farmworth comes in, and this is where Flegler comes in, and this is where
you know, anyone, some of the guys that they're trying to sign will come in, and this is why I went after Munster and Ponga to try and provide that. I think you'll see a different style of football from the Dolphins to the let's not make any mistakes and let's grind them out and let's wait for them to fail. You know, like we've seen happen quite a few times already this season against the Titans. They failed. The Dolphins hung in there. Parramatta failed. The Dolphins hung in there and then blew them away. So that's how they go about it.
It's
because of their cattle too. I think that they have as well. It's partly.
It's for those of us, for example, who think that Super League is not as bad as people say it is, and the NRL isn't as good as people say it is. It was really refreshing to have a team essentially picked out of the bottom half of the NRL turn up and play 50% competently and make a lot of the league look very bad overnight. Sort of made everybody go, oh, maybe we're not, can't say it out loud that maybe this competition isn't the World All-Stars that we say it is. But I think there's a point in that in terms of like the expectations from the fan base and from what the rest of the NRL thinks of them, because you can only do that for so long, right? You can only, when you are, as we'd say in Irish, you're playing the poor mouth, which is like you say, these are the guys that got, so this is their expectations and this is how we have to do it. It's fine. But then as that, you add a Flegler and a Farnworth every year and things change. And suddenly people go, hang on, this lot have got 4 Origin players in their team. Why are they doing this? And I guess that's the next step. And when you look at, for example, we don't want to dwell too much on what's happened this year because it's very early in the season, but like there are aspects of this Dolphins side where I think it's easy to do that when nobody thinks that you're going to be anything or that there's very little expectations. And I wonder, you mentioned there, Brien, that it was the first time you saw them, you were happy just to be there, but you're going to get to that point where it isn't going to be that. And it's going to be, okay, well, are we going to win this competition? Because I don't think, for example, the Titans have been in the comp for nearly 16 years. They're kind of in the still happy to be there stage, When does that kick in for Redcliffe? Because Redcliffe, you say, prior to being in the NRL, was all about winning.
I would say for me, week in, week out, it's already there. In that, like I made the comment to my wife, it was a few Saturday nights ago, they lost a game that I didn't think they should have lost. And I was sitting there and my wife was going up to bed, sort of said goodnight. And I said, I'll be up in 10 minutes. The game will be done. And I didn't go up for like 2 hours. I was like filthy. And I came up later and I just said to her, like, I've never been I've not been affected by a game like that. Probably Origin, like, when Queensland loses an Origin, but it's starting to kick in. It's definitely, whereas last year, if we lost, we lost. And especially we had, as you said, the limited roster, but then the injuries came in. And yeah, there's been injuries this year and it's still probably not the strongest roster on paper, but the expectations are already starting to kick in for me as a fan, I think. And totally to your point, I think with the additions of your Fleglers and your Farnworths, like I look at their backline and I'm quite happy with their backline and how it looks at the moment. So I think that brings expectation with it. And so, yeah, I'm definitely at the stage where I'm starting to flick from, I'm not sitting here going, oh, I'm filthy that we aren't, going to win a comp this year necessarily, but certainly week to week with those games, my expectations are a lot higher.
I don't want to sound like a Sydney chauvinist here as well, but there is this, I think there's been an element of scheduling, and I'm saying the Dolphins are the only team who get this because I'd like to present the Cronulla Sharks to you for a team who get a very, very easy ride out of scheduling quite a lot. But one of my favourite stats that I've been using this year is that the Dolphins will play 6 games in Sydney by the end of the year, and that's 6 in their entire history. Whereas in the same time, for example, the Cowboys will have played 14. And there is the fact that I've never seen a Dolphins game in person because I live in Sydney is quite damning. Although admittedly, I live in Manly and they have played Manly, but I was somewhere else. But there are elements I think that they have had a little bit easy from everybody else as well. Like they're not losing. I mean, how many players did you lose to Origin last year? 1, I think. Hammer. Yeah. 2, maybe. Gilbert might have played the first one. And there is a bit of that. And I wonder, Joel, when you look at, say, the Titans, for example, they might look at this and go, well, hang on, if we had the Dolphins draw, we'd probably do a bit better as well. Is there a little bit of that where getting to play at Lang Park means you always play in the opposite week to the Broncos and all this kind of stuff? Am I imagining that?
Oh, you're probably not, Mike, I'd say. But it's funny that I think if you spoke to the Dolphins, they wouldn't have a bar of it. And I remember...
Still surprised me that.
No. I can tell you they're not happy about one thing in this year's draw. When you look at it, and look, all things being equal, they'd probably have Flegler, Hammer, and possibly Kafusi. I mean, they won't have a lot of them, but they've got three games around Origin where they won't have their Origin players, and a couple of them are out at Redcliffe, and so they're not going to have the big stars in their team either. So I know that they were filthy about that. So, like you're saying, there's they've got a lot less games in Sydney. That's not what they're focused on. They're focused on the dud draw they got off the NRL around Origin time, right? So I don't think you're going to get anyone at the Dolphins conceding they've got an easy run of the draw at all. I think that's going to happen at all. No. And I think the other thing, it's the other thing the Dolphins have. This is probably away from your point, but it's almost like, it's not a siege mentality like Dez's, but they're not going to concede that they've got any advantages. And I know they're very unhappy about the gradings that they get at the NRL. And you look at a lot of the times they've got grade 3s and 2s for their players. This is why they always seem to be suspended for 2 or 3 weeks. Not happy about that one bit. Can't understand why that happens. And also the time that they actually got to put a team together with no concessions. That's another probably bugbear in the background. So the draw, they're going to go, big deal. But you're probably right. You're probably right, though. Yeah, I don't think I'm slightly. Well, you're not going to get Terry saying, "Oh, yeah, we've got a good draw compared to the Cowboys." He's not going to say that. No.
Well, no. I'm sat here in the Catalans Dragon stuff, and I know that when the Catalans came into Super League, they were, you can't get relegated for a year, blah blah blah. They did get a couple of, should we say, strategic advantages that Castleford. I think Castleford might have got relegated that year. Who probably, or Wakefield, no, one of those two, and who would have gone, wonder how this would have gone if we'd have been speaking French to each other. But look, Challenge Cup winning several grand finals later, who cares? Nobody remembers the losers. But I'm intrigued as well about I wanted to sort of touch. We touched on the Queensland Cup All Stars element, but there is, Brien, a little bit of the old guard now. I think when you move forward, we can finish by sort of casting forward to next year and beyond that. And when you look at life after Kafusi, Bromwich's, Nichols, all these guys, is that does that hold expectation or fear or excitement in terms of these fundamental players who've been kind of week in, week out, set and forget guys? They're going to be, you've got these older sort of flash players now. The backline looks pretty good, but is that going to be sort of the big question going forward into the start of the Christian Wolf era?
Yeah, I think my one hope is that they don't all leave at the same time. Like that would be. I know Jesse Bromwich is this will be his final season. I think if we lost those 3 Storm guys all at once, I'd be real nervous about that. But I think there's probably some exciting younger guys coming through. Like we saw Oren Keeley. A couple of, he's been over the start of the season. He's been a really exciting sort of young forward. And there's a few younger guys who are coming through that I'm excited to see more of. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're losing this little bit of experience, but I'm excited for these younger guys coming through. But we also do, and I mean, Joel, you might be able to comment more on this, is I keep being told that we've got some money, some room to move in the salary cap. So potentially, there's some excitement for some signings somewhere here or there. I mean, losing Wayne might affect the draw card of coming to the Dolphins, but I'd hope that how the club started and the excitement of those spine figures like Katoa and Hammer can draw some players there as well.
I'm looking for Joel on this. Give us the insight on because I try not to talk about signings ever. So,
well, Wayne said at a press conference earlier in the season that they had $2 million to spend, and I wrote the story and I wrote it, and then people came back to me and said, well,
you can't have $2 million to spend this year. He's meant to have spent it already. Anyway, I thought, oh, was Wayne just sort of shooting the breeze? I get that wrong. And anyway, I went back and listened to my tape, and no, exactly. He said $2 million this year, and I checked with Terry, and he said we do have $2 million, and we've got a couple of spots left this year in the roster for this year. There's quite a suite of players off contract at the end of this year as well that may not be re-signed. So I think the Dolphins have got a lot of money in the kitty to make some pretty handy signings, and I think that's the other thing that they've done well, is that they've signed Keeley and they've signed Bostock, and these are two very highly regarded New South Wales under 19 players, came through, played under Andrew Ryan and walloped Queensland. I think we're going to see these guys, and Keeley really impresses me as a young man, and also the way he plays. I think we're going to hear a lot more about him in the future. So whilst they may not be big names, I think we're going to see some of these guys come to fruition. Max Plath looks like he's a pocket battleship, and he's a very different character to his father. He was a real larrikin lair and loved the discos and the nightlife. But he's going to be a player. So I think the roster's pretty good underneath at the moment. And the key for me is the player Hammer's turned out to be, the player Marshall King has turned out to be. And like we hear the commentators waxing lyrical that he's the most deceptive and the best line breaker for a hooker in the comp at a dummy half. He somehow manages to catch people out. And then you've got Katoa, this guy that's, when he talks to you, you think he's 30. Like he talks about the sports psychologist, what he's teaching him. He really goes deep into what he's learning. And you see it in the way he plays, the way he goes deep into the line. His kicks, he has got a boot on him and a variety of kicks. I watch him do his extras. I think the fact they got those three guys in that spine position, and I know you can get an injury and that can really hurt you. I think they're on the right track. There's a few more pieces to put into place, I would have thought. A couple of more powerhouse forwards, I think that would really assist their cause. So some real game breakers, and we haven't seen Gilbert yet. Like, to me, he's their spiritual leader, even though he's young. Like you watch him train, that guy never shuts up. He drives it. I mean, he's really he's definitely future captain of that team, and unfortunately, we just haven't seen him on the field. So I think there's a lot to like about what the building blocks are at the moment, and I just like to see a bit more skill. The money's there to buy it, and I think to go with the Queensland Cup All-Stars, it's going to be a team I think will continue to be embraced by people that have loved Redcliffe all their lives and the Dolphins, but also by a new generation of people that want someone else, especially in Brisbane, to support other than the Brisbane Broncos.
I think that's a good bit to end. You just give me one last sort of thought of a question for Brien there, which is, was there a resentment towards the Broncos? Because I imagine 50% of all people hate whatever the most dominant thing is all the time. We see that as soon as, especially in Australia, as soon as anybody's a big thing, you can guarantee a significant proportion are going to go, well, I'm the anti-big thing. Are Redcliffe primed to be the anti-big thing until they are the big thing, and everyone will go back to thinking Broncos are underdogs like they did in 1988? And how will that sit with your soul?
But there is I would love, and maybe I'm a bit separate or a bit opposite to a lot of fans. Nothing would make me happier, and even in Q Cup, because I had a lot of people when they got put in, everyone was like, "Oh, any Q Cup fans." And I work out in the Redlands, which is Big Winner Manly, right? And so they're all going, "We hate Redcliffe, like they suck," and that gives me lifeblood. Like any fan who gets upset about their team being hated, the only reason, or the most prevalent reason a team is hated, is because they're successful. So nothing would make me happier than for the Dolphins to be hated because they're really good, because they were in the Queensland Cup and I still loved it, and I will love it if it happens in the NRL. So hopefully it does.
I'll leave that as a brilliant place to end on. And I say that as someone who was dialing in from Manly, and we hate you too. So on that note, I'll say thanks a lot, Brien. Thanks a lot, Joel. As ever, we end these with please like, subscribe. If you like this podcast, tell people about it, because we have deliberately done episodes that can be listened back almost infinitely. We try and deep dive rather than stay to the week to week for exactly that reason. So please go to the back catalogue, tell us what you like, and then just because my social media man will have a go, leave us a review, because apparently that helps. So thanks a lot, and fins up, I believe.